Hey everybody, I am here with William Sokol Erhard, who is a developer that's worked on AR and VR. He's written for Blurbusters, so many of my fellow nerds may have even read some of his articles before on there. And he created the software Vint, which is video playback software that I've been messing with. And that's what drove me to reach out because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about today, especially Vint, how you could use it to make your content look better, how the human eye interprets motion, which is something I talk about all the time for people, for the concept of why we're going for a CRT look. It's not some stupid nostalgia chase, it's actually technical reasons why. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Bob.
Of course. So, can you give just we'll dig into it more later, but just a quick background of your work, and then we'll start talking about Vint right away, because I think it's something that people would be interested in.
Absolutely. So I come from a background of more than 8 years of professional augmented and virtual reality development experience, working with all sorts of different headsets and developing 3D software, not just for interactive games and entertainment products, but also especially for commercial use. So this means aerospace, this means medical context, automotive, retail, things like that. Especially real estate also leverages XR technology quite a bit. I've gotten the opportunity, fortunately, to work on some very interesting rendering technology. I created the first implementation of any sort of real time ray tracing or path tracing in augmented virtual reality back in 2019 while I was working at Volkswagen. But I've gotten the chance to work quite a bit with video, with cameras and sensor technology, and out of a desire to make software that I would want to use, I created the Vint software to process videos and improve their temporal fidelity through computational means. Yeah.
So, that's how I stumbled across Vint was a conversation with Mark from Blurbusters, which whenever you talk about BFI and any kind of interpolation stuff, Mark somehow always always becomes part of the conversation in my group of
He
friends.
does.
And I started messing with it, and it was amazing and overwhelming in a good way because there was a lot of cool options. But the goal for me, and I've talked about this a lot on RetroRGB, any of the reviews I've done, like the LG OLED behind me and all of that, it's how 24 frame per second content could look on modern displays. And it's always something that drove me crazy. And also, part of that is how to make older content with tons of film grain look like film grain and not look like digital noise. Because I absolutely love my OLED TV until I'm watching old movies because it's so good that all of that digitized film grain looks like noise. And Mark taught me a trick of using BFI that actually, at least to my eyes, which everybody's eyes are different, of course, it made the film grain look kind of more like analog film grain at the expense of a little bit of flicker and dimming the image. And I did make sure that it wasn't a brightness thing. I did just try turning the brightness down, and it was not at all the same. And there was so that sent me down a crazy rabbit hole, and I'll give the arm's length explanation, and I'll let you take it from there. But so that's when I started to really learn about 24p strobing. And the analogy I came up with, which please stop me if this is really stupid, but anybody remember those old school strobe lights? The higher you turn up the strobe, the more you still get that fun dance party effect, but the less it kind of hurts your eyes. And the more you
Yeah.
slow it down, the more you're going, whoa, wait, this is messing with my brain. So when you turn on BFI with 24p strobing, it's like the strobe light at the lowest setting, and it's really just painful to look at. So Mark taught me a trick of instead of one on, three off type of thing, it's on, off, on, off, on, off. And four times, so 96 hertz looked great on a projector, a DLP projector, which I have a feeling I know why. And the 144 hertz looked great on the OLED in most scenarios.
Yeah.
But I was looking to see, that's kind of what led me to Vint is, can you just do this in software? Because the RetroTink 4K Pro is an amazing piece of hardware, but unless you use it for all of the other stuff that it's supposed to be used for, I would never tell anybody go buy it just to do this experiment. So that's kind of where I stumbled across Vint, and I saw that you had your black frame insertion, multi-strobe, 35 millimeter projection style. So why don't I just kind of pass the baton over to you and let you
Yeah.
kind of go through 24p and Vint, and if I did I get the analogy right at least?
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the exact
Okay.
same principle. And I mean, there's all sorts of strobing effects in the man-made world, very little in the natural world. And the way that our eyes and our cognitive processing has evolved is vulnerable to flickering processes. It can fool us quite effectively in the right circumstances, but it's also not evolved to handle those necessarily well under unideal circumstances.
Mm,
So one more thing I'll add is yeah, Vint. I think I built it around the idea of giving the user the choice, so they can either watch it as it comes, which obviously has more than a few issues in many circumstances. More and more as we get brighter, larger displays that are cheaper and more accessible. As we're getting movies that, I mean, I think it's fantastic that we're seeing directors like Alejandro Inarritu making movies that feel like one cut. There's no constant cuts, but that also entails quite a bit more camera motion. And unfortunately, as you take these creative liberties with the movie with this camera motion, the low frame rate becomes more of a problem than if you had a stationary camera like you did 100 years ago in the silent film era, where the only motion were the people moving in the frame. So that low frame rate wasn't quite as problematic. Um, yeah, and then with Vint, so there's the interpolation portion. I'm sure we'll get to that later.
mhm.
The black frame insertion, like you mentioned, I as many customizations in there as I could. So you got multi-strobe, as well as the ability to control the ratio of the black frame insertion.
Mhm.
And then you also have the CRT emulation, which I'm sure we'll get to as well. So have basically simulating in software through a sense of brute force this rolling strobing effect, kind of like you see with a cathode ray tube display, which allows you to have a less intense flicker effect at the same frame rate versus a more traditional global strobe. And then the
Yeah, and
secondary
just
benefit
can
as well.
I
Go ahead.
gotta interrupt for
Yeah.
1 second because I think most of my audience has probably heard me talk about this, but the very quick 30-second explanation is CRT beam simulate,
Yes.
the Blur Busters one, that essentially I'm gonna oversimplify here for all my smart friends are gonna get mad at me, but it takes the image and chops it up into how many ratios you get per frame. So if you're 60
Yeah.
frame per second image on a 240 frame per second monitor, you could have the image is chopped into 4 pieces,
That's
and
correct. Yeah.
to your eyes, it is trying to simulate how a CRT draws one beam at a time, essentially each line being its own black frame insertion type of thing, then which significantly reduces motion blur. But when you do it in pieces like that, it's not as jarring as full screen on and off BFI, and it is brighter too, especially the higher refresh rates that you go. So that's a pretty decent like 30-second overview, right?
To some degree. So one thing I want to kind of focus on is the brightness component. So one good part, which has an interesting impact, is that in addition to simply breaking up the strobe into multiple chunks, which doesn't necessarily replicate the CRT functionality, even if you could break it up into 480 chunks, right?
Mhm.
To recreate that retro fidelity, but it also simulates the CRT's phosphor decay, and phosphors decay at different rates, and it's not a linear process. They don't light up for X milliseconds and then turn it off immediately. It's very much a progressive process. If you look at a CRT under a high frame rate recording, the high frame rate guys, I believe.
The slow-mo
they
guys,
slow-mo
yeah,
guys.
I've
That's
linked to that video quite a bit, yeah.
It's great, and you can see how like where the electron beam is hitting the phosphors, it lights up very bright, and then it immediately decays a ton, and then it slowly decays over the course. But the end result, of course, is that the entire screen appears to be lit,
Mhm.
especially at rates that are exceeding the flicker fusion threshold, and we'll get to that as well. Um, but with the software
So just to
recreation, yeah,
simplify it, when we say CRT beam simulate, that's what
yes,
we're talking about. So back to Vint. My apologies for the pause, but I
absolutely.
like to keep, I know this really upsets some listeners, but I do like to try to keep everybody on the same page, and more people appreciate it than don't. So sorry to everybody that pisses off, that pisses off, but all right.
Absolutely. But yeah, so obviously we're trying to recreate that as best we can in software. And it is absolutely possible to perfectly recreate it with adequate technology, but that it's definitely not available now. But we're getting there. There's definitely a path. So with this phosphor decay simulation that is added together with the scanning beam simulation, and that's one of the big strengths of the work that Mark Rajan and Blair Busters and Timothy Lott did to combine that into one simulation system. It also shows the brighter elements for longer than the darker elements.
Mm. Mhm.
So you get more motion blur, more persistence with brighter elements, but they also end up being brighter to the eye. So you get the best motion fidelity on the darker elements. Um, but obviously you don't really need the brightness on those. It's a nice trade off, and I think produces a pleasing result.
Mm.
Um, yeah, but then one thing I did want to kind of note is that as you do increase the ratio, right? Obviously, the more times you're able to break up the image, the closer you are able to recreate an actual CRT kind of experience. However, like any sort of black frame insertion, or strobing of any type, given a fixed amount of brightness on a display, the more you break it up, the more black that you show, the darker the end result will be.
Mhm.
So that is something you need to keep in mind. And displays are getting a lot brighter, especially in recent years. OLEDs are getting tandem OLED technology, and they're doing a lot of interesting stuff there to increase brightness, and they're getting very competitive with LCDs, which have been obviously focusing on brightness for decades now. But then you also have other emissive display technologies, quantum dot emissive layer, which will be forthcoming, and has the potential to absolutely surpass the performance capabilities, also in brightness, but also in color vibrancy of OLED. But then you have technologies like micro LED, which is fundamentally the same LED technology that you find in a flashlight or car headlights, which I'm sure if you've driven at night, you know how bad that brightness is in certain contexts, but it also unlocks incredible potential, especially in display technology. And if you can turn that into a display, and we can, the only problem is those cost 6 or 7 figures at the moment, but that won't be forever. That kind of technology will allow you to keep that kind of brightness and allow us to break up the image far more and reduce that persistence way more, while still getting a good result. So yes, that is that trade-off. It won't necessarily be a problem with adequate display technology. Absolutely. But to get back to the question that you asked a little bit earlier about 24 FPS, in handling that kind of motion. So there is the concept of the flicker fusion threshold, and ultimately, the human eye has a collection of rods and cones, um, and essentially, light hitting those light sensors in your eye produces electrical impulses in your eye that are sent through the optical nerve into your brain, um, and those happen continuously, right? There's no rate at which that happens. It's simply a continuous process. There's no frames involved here. But in the same way that, again, the slow mo guy's CRT video, where the electron beam hits the phosphors and they're bright, there's a strong impulse, and then it decays. It slowly goes away. But it takes a while. Like, it can take at least a frame under some circumstances, depending on how sensitive you're measuring. The same thing happens with those electrical impulses in your eye. So you get that impulse, it creates that electrical signal, that signal persists to a certain degree, and then your mind also keeps some level of continuity there as well. So with that in mind, those persistence values tend to be around 10 milliseconds in length, very broadly. Again, there's so much variation here.
And also
Go
how
ahead.
much you've trained your brain for stuff like this. So
Yeah.
elite pro level video game players, fighter pilots, a lot of people can actually. There was an F1 racer that said he can't watch movies because they're too slow or it gives him a headache. Like people that train their brain to do high speed things a lot can absolutely react faster, and they can see faster than people who don't. Exactly like people who are professional runners can run faster than people who aren't. Same
I
very
think
rudimentary concept.
I think I'd compare it to competitive runners who can listen to the starting gun and react quickly to that. That's the comparison that I make. Reaction time can absolutely be trained, and you can be trained to be more sensitive to one thing or another. Absolutely. I will note that what you're talking about, like fighter pilots, I believe the study was revolving, showing an image of an aircraft for a very very small fraction of a second, like 1/240th of a second. So a persistence of like 4 milliseconds, and they were still able to, from again just that tiny flash of that fighter, identify what that aircraft was by its silhouette, which I think is even more impressive than what you might assume given the 240 number. But yeah, so this is not quite the same thing. This is focused specifically on the flicker fusion and flicker aspects. So I would refer people to the, I believe it's called the Journey to 1,000 FPS or 1,000 Hertz article on Blurbusters. Mark Rejon did a fantastic job in this breakdown now more than 5 years ago, where he goes on to describe the different benefits of increasing frame rate and refresh rate, and why it's important to push well beyond the old 60 hertz kind of standard we settled on with CRTs and then LCDs, but then beyond the 120, 240 hertz that we've become more familiar with in modern times, beyond even the best displays available. And while it says 1,000 hertz, what he really means is the limits of human vision exceed 10,000 hertz.
Right.
But those benefits obviously are diminishing over time, but they're still very real. So the most sensitive thing we are able to see is that flicker, like I mentioned. But then above that, sorry, I just want to make sure I have the exact component here.
Yeah, just
So
to correct myself, I guess I'd misunderstood. And you're talking simply about the way your brain processes the flicker, not processes images at that speed. So I'm glad you went
yeah,
through and explained it. But yeah, just for anybody who
excellent.
was thinking about that, yeah, I got that one wrong. My bad.
No worries. Yeah, so there are, like I said, a variety of different effects. So there's the flicker, like I mentioned, and that's at about what is that? 10 to the second power hertz frequency. At 10 to the 1 power, very, very broadly, your brain separates between basically a series of images and something approximating motion. Typically, that number tends to be around 17 hertz. So obviously, 24 FPS is perceived as motion, even if there are many, many issues that we'll get into. And then at 10 to the 2 power, you get the basically the elimination of perceptible flicker. The flicker fusion threshold is met. But I want to say that these numbers are very fuzzy. There's no hard number. It differs between different types of people. There are 7 parameters here that are commonly used to describe what makes somebody more or less sensitive to flicker. So the frequency of the modulation. So obviously the main factor that determines how much flicker you see. Then the amount of modulation, which basically is the brightness of the image that you're looking at in this case. So the average intensity, so there's the maximum intensity and then the average intensity of that flicker that you see. And then also the wavelength of the flicker. So different colors can be more clearly flickering than others to the human eye. So where on your eye also determines how sensitive you are to flicker. You're more sensitive to motion and flicker artifacts in the periphery of your vision than in the center of your vision. You also have, to some degree, better ability to view low light objects in the periphery of your vision as well. And that's why sometimes you can see things out of the corner of your eye, and you might be more sensitive to motion in those circumstances. Obviously, it's kind of an evolutionary protection there. And then the 6th factor here is the degree of light adaptation. So if you were in a dark room and then you view the flicker versus if you were in a bright room and then you view the flicker, you're going to have a different experience. And then the final one is physiological factors. So your age, your sex, how well rested you are, your fatigue level, all can determine how sensitive you are to flicker. But the end result is that the commonly accepted flicker fusion threshold that most people are okay with. There are definitely exceptions, but most people would be okay with 90 hertz, which is why that was considered back a decade ago to be the bare minimum for virtual reality, which obviously depends heavily on flicker just for its basic operation. But unfortunately, we've seen some some hardware push below that rate, which almost invariably results in discomfort or sickness in the user, which obviously makes them not quite so interested in using virtual reality. So given those factors, obviously you want to keep the rate above that 90 hertz rate for flicker for the best experience. But there can still be effects beyond that. I want to make that clear. This is where you don't perceive flicker, but you can still have other flicker-related experiences, and sometimes it can produce physiological symptoms. You can get headaches, other sensitivities depending on
Absolutely. And what you said about fatigue, I never put 2 and 2 together until you just said it. But
Yeah.
when I'm testing BFI stuff here, very often it's in a dark room and I've been working 12 hours and I'll walk away from that like disoriented and not feeling well and kind of getting a headache. And then I'll go back the next day or a couple days later and I'll repeat the same tests and it'll look fine and I'll feel fine. So yeah, that's I never put 2 and 2 together with that. So when I'm really tired or sick, don't be BFI testing late at night.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for stimulation sickness and these kinds of sensitivities, I'll also recommend ginger. It kind of sounds a little ridiculous, but like popping some ginger candy or drinking a ginger beer is actually what I recommend to people who are vulnerable to simulation sickness in virtual reality. So
yeah, there's actually a lot of proof behind that, by the way. So you're not just that's not just some placebo effect. That's something I've been interested in for a while because when I was a kid, I used to get car sick a lot. Never puke in the car sick, but enough to ruin my day. And that was one of the things where I used to hate ginger. I like it a lot now, actually. But but yeah, that's funny you mentioned that too.
Absolutely, and obviously the big benefit there is that it's easy to consume, and it doesn't come along with the side effects that you might find with more pharmaceutical solutions as well,
Yeah.
which can definitely have some nasty side effects. So with the Journey to 1000 Hertz article that Mark Rejan of Blurrbusters wrote, there's the motion, there's the flicker at 10 to the third power, so 1000 hertz. You stop getting a substantial amount of sample and hold persistence blur.
Hmm.
That is where that motion blur tends to diminish. But obviously, that all depends upon the speed of what you're looking at and a bunch of other factors as well. But very broadly, 10 to the third power. And then 10 to the fourth power is where you start to see the diminishment of the stroboscopic effect, which maybe sounds a little misleading, strobing and all. And obviously, yes, from a purely like physics standpoint, strobing, that concept still applies here. It's just not the flicker that we're kind of used to referring to. So 10 to the fourth power, that's going to be 10,000 hertz. And that's where the stroboscopic effect diminishes. And the stroboscopic effect is basically your ability to see a phantom array. So like if you move your mouse cursor around, obviously at 60 hertz, you see each of the previous positions of that mouse cursor very clearly. And as you increase the frame rate, the more previous positions you see. And ultimately, once you start to approach 10,000 hertz or so, those different trails blend together into one continuous blur rather than a bunch of discrete elements. So those are the kind of core pieces there. But obviously, even the flicker fusion threshold is well beyond the 24 FPS that we're talking about. So let's talk about that a little bit. I'm not an expert in film history per se, but I have taken an interest. And some aspects that have really stood out to me are that obviously back in the day, you've got just traditional photography, and then you take multiple photographs that turns into a video. And the early film cameras were literally hand crank, right? Like you had somebody moving their hand over the crank, and that controlled the speed, which obviously was not just not standard from recording to recording. It was also not standard throughout the recording. It was variable frame rate. And then obviously the playback was even less consistent there. So no consistency there. And when you don't have audio, that's not the end of the world. And because film is expensive, you try to use as little as possible. And if you have a small, dim projection, then it's not the end of the world if the result is rather slow and flickery and choppy. That's okay. As these flicks, as they obviously became called because of the flicker, they knew about the issue back then too. As they became more popular, the recording rates became more standardized. But then there was kind of a race between the people recording the films who wanted the film to be a bit longer. They wanted to engross the audience for more time. But then the theater owners wanted to show as many of these flicks as possible to sell as many tickets as possible. And the faster that you play back the movie, the faster you get through a flick, and you get the same amount of money in less time, and you can show more movies. It's great. And that increases the frame rate from 12, 16, 18 FPS towards the end. But then audio comes along. And with the standard film stock, as I understand, and this may be apocryphal, and it's hard to get a real historical understanding of this. The records are not as clear as we'd like. Even the films themselves, like something like 85% of silent films are completely lost to time. Like the most popular silent films. These are not obscure ones that weren't shown. These are like, of the most popular ones, 85% are lost, just completely. So in that circumstance, it's kind of understandable that we have to rely upon some stories that may be of questionable validity. But as I understand, it's fairly likely that the push for 24 FPS to become the standard with mechanical recording and all that, and the combination of audio and the image onto film, Uh, Given the standard film stock of the time and the practice of using the film not just to capture an image, but also to embed an audio recording alongside the image. That was kind of standard practice, so that you didn't need a separate spool of magnetic tape or anything else. The synchronization was immensely easier when you can have those both integrated into the same film strip for distribution and all that. So,
Technology Connections posted a
yeah.
video last year on that. It was a pretty good job.
Oh, Technology Connections is fantastic. Alec does a great job of explaining all of these kinds of concepts. They tend to be more of his older videos. He hasn't touched on video technology all that much recently, but his older stuff I highly recommend watching. Yeah, so like I said, integrating the audio into this film stock required a certain number of film grains in order to get an acceptable level of audio quality, right? You had to move the film at a certain pace in order to make sure the audio wasn't aliasing just in awful ways. And I guess that was more uncomfortable for people than the flicker of the image. But that pushed the frame rate to 24 FPS. That became standardized across everything. There were some experiments with higher frame rates. Edison, for all of his faults, obviously a big figure in the early film industry, and then it's part of why everyone ran off to Hollywood to escape his control and create films out there. Anyways, the point is he was experimenting with films around 40 FPS back well over a century ago now. So that is where 24 FPS came from. And again, in that context, we're talking about small, dim images with stationary cameras and not a whole lot of movement going on. Like, think about Charlie Chaplin films and all. And sure, he's a very expressive individual and very amusing in his physical comedy and all. But like, you don't have giant camera panning shots and the things that really drive motion sensitivity that you have today. So when we get HDR, when we get large screens, once we get frankly clearer optics, the more fidelity, the more resolution that you have, the more sensitive you are to motion, because you can actually see what's going on. The higher contrast, dynamic range, all of these different factors combine to really make that 24 FPS that may have been tolerable in some contexts suddenly become very intolerable. So how do we process it? What can we do to improve the situation? Because obviously that has been a century of film history, more than, and we have to find a way to make that experience good for the end user.
And for me personally,
Yeah.
the number one thing that drives me crazy about 24p content, I don't know if this is the correct terminology, but 24p flashing. So if you have a scene on an OLED display, especially a bigger OLED display, and it's panning left and right, or left to right, or right to left, and there's bright and dark elements on the screen.
Yeah.
Like there's one scene, the movie Tora Tora Tora. I use it in all of my comparisons because it's got heavy film grain. And one of the scenes, they're walking past a bunch of soldiers with white gloves on. And on an OLED, it looks like the gloves are jerking back and forth. It looks like that, it's probably the worst example in a good way, the worst example of it that I keep referring to. And that's the thing where, you have shots, like you said, even if a person is running around, this camera stationary, you don't notice, it looks fine. But that's the thing. And there was a shot in Pulp Fiction too, where it's, they're entering the dance hall and, they're moving the camera around and the posters on the wall, you get that flicker. And it's not just
Yeah.
old stuff too. There was Alien Earth. There was one scene that was so bad that I actually downloaded the episode and cut that one scene out for when I need to use an HDR example of this as well.
No, absolutely. I find it so ubiquitous. Frankly, like, I would much rather watch processed video in a home cinema than the unprocessed stuff in a theater, simply because even under the best of circumstances, there are still so many artifacts as a result of that low frame rate. And then obviously the worst case scenarios, like you're talking about, can really, really take you out of the moment. Yeah, and like you say with the OLEDs, uh, I have always been a very strong advocate of emissive displays over the far more common liquid crystal transmissive displays, which have kind of masked a lot of the issues in some ways with their
Mhm.
horrifically slow pixel response times. Um,
Yeah, funny you don't get that, 24p flashing with an LCD TV because it
no,
just yeah, it doesn't update fast enough to do that.
yeah, and the flicker is also far less noticeable if you just smear Vaseline over the lens, right? Yeah,
Right.
you can't see anything, so there's no problem. Problem solved.
Right.
Like, I kid you not, that's kind of how things work, and that's why motion blur in video games, software added motion blur, can improve like a lock 30 FPS that might otherwise be even worse without it.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so uh, yeah.
So when you have a software like Vint that's meant to try to use new and interesting ways to get around this, one of the
Yeah.
things that you have is obviously interpolation. And I think the example that you put on your site and the default, does it interpolate from 24 to 30 or is that selectable? I got it open in front of me if I need to reference anything here.
Yeah, so the default, and I mean this to be very user customizable. There is
Mm.
no one size fits all for anybody,
For
and
any person
frankly,
or all content, because different you're
yeah,
watching an old cartoon versus an old movie. That's you might want completely different things on there.
absolutely.
Maybe.
So my software is built around giving the user the tools to make the experience align with what they want. And frankly, like everyone talks about how directorial intent, right, and artistic intent is so critical, and how it's such an awful thing that these TVs are automatically adding interpolation. So you have to build a cinematic filmmaker mode to disable all of these things because it's an abomination and it ruins the artistic intent. But frankly, the arrogance that the director can just simply dictate what is best for the end user is astounding to me. Like, I'm sorry, like, sure, you have an artistic intent and you want to convey this, and this is your recommended experience, by all means, and make that available to the end user. But to say, I know better than you how you should consume this is just arrogant, frankly. So my software is built
Yeah.
around giving the user that control. Yeah.
So for something like interpolation, and
Yeah.
if I'll try to put screenshots or anything, any kind of notes. The software is obviously available to purchase, and I highly recommend it if you're a tinkerer like me. But for doing something like you add the interpolation option for, and the file that I'm using now, just to talk through this, just to kind of give more real time examples here, is a Ducktales episode that had been uh, put back to its original 720 by 480 at 23,976. So it's been inverse telecinied back to. So I think that's good because it's not going to spike my CPU. I'd love to be doing this with a 1080p 24 Blu-ray, but let's just keep it easier. So, but it's also the
Mhm.
same just because the resolution's smaller. It's the same concept, 24 frames per second. So the different multipliers here for interpolate, what are the options for that? Because it's on the line it's just disable, interpolate, black frame insertion for this.
And
So
CRT emulation, schema emulation.
oh yes, you just gotta you. By the way, if anybody doesn't see CRT emulation, you just grab and drag it across so that you could make it wider.
In
It's
the
funny.
same vein that I want to give the user as much control as possible, the interface is controllable and customizable. You can drag these different windows around and reposition them, make them bigger, smaller, everything that is entirely within your control as the end user. So if something is hidden, it's probably you just need to slide it over a little bit and yeah. Yeah, so the core options, the default option, I believe that I set, and again, I don't want to focus on the default because again, it depends so heavily on what you want, what your hardware is, and what you're trying to accomplish with that video. So I set it to a 2x multiplier, I believe, by
Mhm.
default with interpolation, and that's fairly easy, right?
Mhm.
Especially if most content is 24, 25, 30 FPS. The performance impact is all very similar. to do a simple 2x multiplier. Obviously, it is higher if you have a 60 FPS source video. And then I alternatively have the option to target a specific output frame rate.
Okay.
So if you want a consistent output for a display, regardless of the video that you feed into it. So you can take a 24 FPS video, you can take a 30 FPS video, and you can output both seamlessly into a 60 FPS or 120 FPS or 240 FPS output without having to think about it. You just play it and it works. Yeah, but again, this is all customizable. I have a drop-down menu. You can select whatever option you prefer. And you can even add custom options if you like. I have a custom slider that you can use in the interface, or you can literally go into the text files and add new options to the drop-down menu. Like, I make this as easy as I can, but as powerful as I can, especially as customizable. Yeah, so for interpolation, I will also note, so in order to improve the motion fidelity, like I said, I give you three options: interpolation, black frame insertion, and the CRT scan-out emulation. Those will have different impacts depending on the source video. Flicker can absolutely do wonders, right? You don't get any of the impact of interpolation artifacts, right? The result is more pure if you use strobing techniques. And especially if you have a 60 FPS source video or something like that, you can often get a very good result with strobing techniques. And many people prefer it, and I try to give you as many customization options there as I can. But you do absolutely have to be mindful of that flicker, right? If you just feed in a 24 FPS video and you do simple black frame insertion, it will flicker like nobody's business. It will be, frankly, an unpleasant result for a lot of people, for most people. So I do give you those multiple projection options, which are not magic. They're not a panacea. They will reduce the flicker, but they will multiple project. So the end result in motion is that you're going to see multiple images. And that is how it was shown in theaters, because in order to reduce the flickering, you increase the strobing rate without increasing the video rate, and you get multiple images. So if you prefer that, it's there. You get to choose it. It's inside of your control. But then the interpolation. So this escapes any of the strobing benefits and drawbacks. You do require a very capable computer, I will note. So the focus of Vint in the interpolation is fidelity. I am trying to get the highest quality possible in real time. And I think I achieve it quite well. I've been using quite a few open source libraries here, the best hardware acceleration possible, NVIDIA Tensor RT acceleration. And NVIDIA has been adding very, very good tensor acceleration capabilities in their especially more modern generations of RTX GPUs. But I also have support for Intel CPUs and GPUs. The CPU acceleration will work on any processor. So you could, in theory, use like a Threadripper processor and run things in real time. It is not remotely as powerful, obviously, as GPU acceleration. So that is something you need to keep in mind. It will work for transcoding, for example. So there's the real time and the transcoding capabilities. So for the transcoding, you can just kind of set it and forget it. Come back and you get a processed video. And it doesn't have to run in real time. So you can get way higher resolutions and quality through that if that's the way you want to go. And then I also have recently been working on adding AMD acceleration as well. So that's in the current state of Vint, and I'm continuing to work on that. And I'm also working on bringing Vint to Linux. That's the next platform I'm looking to support. But yes, so with this interpolation, fidelity is the focus. And this is not the interpolation that you're going to find on your TV.
Yeah, I probably should have started with that, because I think a lot of people may have gone, "Ugh, I hate that setting. I hate the soap opera effect." That's not what this is at all.
Yeah, no. So we were talking about directorial intent and how TVs automatically interpolate, because frankly, TV manufacturers are trying to make the best experience for the end user. And the end users, if you give them a blind test, are going to be like, oh, this is choppy. Oh, this is smooth. I like this TV.
Right.
They're not going to know why. It doesn't matter. Like, it's just, this is the old retired person who goes out and buys oh, this TV looks nice. I'll take it home and use it and watch my stories. And more power to them. They shouldn't need to think about these things. These should already be good out of the box. But the end result is that interpolation on the TV has to work in a very, very limited power budget. They're doing very simple processing, and it has to work on anything that feeds into the TV. It adds quite a bit of latency. And obviously, people have to recommend disabling any sort of processing on your TV in order to reduce latency for your console or your PC. But this interpolation on those TVs, it's running on an ASIC processor on that TV. It's a general purpose MEMC, motion estimation, motion compensation algorithm. Nothing too fancy. It does the trick for simple panning shots, for example. Like if you just have simple translation, that can handle that well. But if you start to have like parallax, if you have multiple objects moving at different speeds in the scene, things break down really quickly and you start to see some nasty artifacts. And it also tends to just stop processing if it gets too bad. So it's inconsistent as well as just not very high quality. And of course, budget, they want to cheap out on this chip as much as possible. So they're not going to put in $1,000 gaming GPU into the machine, even if they could.
Right.
So it's not going to be able to do complex processing. It's not going to use depth-aware algorithms. What else? That is not what Vint does. What Vint does is very flexible. Not only can you control exactly how you want to use it, you can train your own models. So Vint uses the Rife engine, real-time intermediate frame estimation. So it's a convolutional neural network that is depth aware. And what that means is essentially it's identifying objects within an image and it's matching those to another image, so two images in sequence. And it can use those, create a depth map, basically understand the 3D context of the images that it's looking at, and then create new understanding of what happens in between. And the end result is it handles parallax very well. It handles very complex scenes very well. And it doesn't break down. Like, there are obviously artifacts. It's unavoidable. If you try to create information out of nothing that was not stored in some way, then again, there will inevitably be imperfections. But what it does do is as good as a job as it can, as good as, I dare to say, the processing you might find in some of the super high fidelity Hollywood movie releases. So interpolation is used in like some of the James Cameron films, like Avatar: The Way of Water. And the interpolation that's going on in Vint is more akin to that. But it also means, like I said, it requires quite a bit of computational power to work well. And that's why GPU acceleration, where you have that very broad, wide compute capability, is so powerful, so important. So with that acceleration, you may have to turn down resolution depending on your hardware. Obviously, if you have a 5090, probably not a problem. If you have a 2060, might be a little bit more difficult. But I give you those controls. I give you the ability to scale the image very, very easily and seamlessly, and it still produces a good result because the image is not compressed. So even if you scale down to like 1080p, it doesn't look like a 1080p YouTube stream. It's entirely uncompressed in this pipeline. It's processed and then fed out and scaled up to the output result. And Vint also seamlessly works with like RTX video
Mhm.
upscaling. So you can upscale the video resolution after the fact. You can also add RTX HDR and add HDR to an SDR video. You can do all these upscaling techniques together. And I built Vint on top of MPV, the open
Mhm.
source video player MPV, which is very customizable. The performance is fantastic in MPV, so it serves as a fantastic base for Vint. But then it also has some fantastic features like variable refresh rate support, which is critical. So if you have a VRR display, you can interpolate 2x on a 24 FPS video on a 120 hertz screen, and it outputs at 48 FPS on that screen
Hmm.
without any sort of frame mismatch or anything like that. Perfect frame pacing. Um, yeah.
So, from a somebody who wants to mess with this point of view, let's just say we have the situation that I always complain about, where you have older content with the heavy and film grain, and you're watching it on an OLED, so you have the OLED flashing. Um, Now, when you have the black frame insertion option here, you have single, triple, and double. So
Yeah.
simply by a single, yeah, I think I may have said simple. Sorry, I'm single, triple, and double.
I think both work, but
So
yeah.
yeah, yeah, fair enough. So single is just simply talking about, you could, and underneath there's a little bar where you could, or a little slider thing where you could add however many black frame insertions based on your target display. So
Yeah.
if it's a 24p video on a 240 hertz display like I'm using, there's up to 10 black frame insertions available here.
Yeah.
But for 24p stuff, that's obviously just going to be headache
That's
inducing.
going to be a
So
rough experience. Yeah.
right, so you would want double, and that's each frame on off, just like I showed
That's
in my
correct.
videos, just like we talked about before.
A 50%
And
duty cycle would be a 1-to-1
yeah,
ratio.
and for the most part, that all how that looks is going to depend on your display. If it's I think triple is probably going to be what most people with high frame rate displays might want. But
Yeah.
so any thoughts and suggestions on settings for that? Just to try to get people's BFI experience as good as it can be. And is there a limit? Like, am I doing this on a 240 hertz display just not a great idea? Or, is 144 hertz better for this? Do you have any thoughts on BFI with 24p and Vint? What you
Absolutely.
suggest?
So the beauty, like I said, of variable refresh rate support is that as long as the maximum refresh rate of your display is above the output rate that you set, it should seamlessly play it back, assuming your display is operating as it should. Yeah. So, like I said, there's these different configuration options in there with triple strobing, which will again result in multiple images. So you're going to see 3 separate images under some circumstances, and again, that is literally how it was shown in some theaters for a good many years there.
Yeah.
So just be aware of that. It will fundamentally result in 6 times the output frames as the input frame. So for a 24 FPS video, the output of triple strobing will be 3 real frames, all the same frame, interlaced with 3 black frames. And the
Right.
output will
So
be
on, off,
144.
on, off, on, off, which is kind of what I demonstrate that the RetroTink 4K could do with 24p sources as
Exactly.
well. So,
Yeah, so that's what it's going to do. And likewise, double strobing is going to result in 4 frames for the input frames. So for 24 FPS, that'll be 96 hertz. And then again, with single strobing, a 1-to-1 ratio will result in 48 FPS from a 24 FPS video. So again, if your display is only 120 hertz, then you can't really use triple strobing with 24 FPS video. Yeah, so double strobing is probably going to be your better bet there. If you don't like those multiple artifacts, then by all means, please stick with the single strobing. Do be aware that again, with low frame rates, that
Yeah, it's
single strobe is
you're
going to be
just not
rough.
gonna see it with, or it's just not really watchable, and that's obviously not a dig at Vint, that's just it's just the way
That's
it
the
is with
nature
black frame
of
insertion in
video.
24p, yeah.
24p is frankly the problem, and I would love if Vint didn't need to exist, right? Like if every
Yeah,
movie was recorded in a way that didn't produce these ugly artifacts, Vint would be irrelevant, and everyone's movie watching experience would be better. But unfortunately, that's not the reality that we live in. So Vint is a way to mitigate those downsides. But yes, that single strobe, I think I wouldn't recommend it for anything below 60 hertz.
mhm,
At 60 hertz, it's still going to flicker. That's still well below the flicker fusion threshold, but that's going to be more like an old CRT. And in many circumstances, that may be an acceptable or a good experience.
mhm.
Um, and you can easily interpolate that. Not interpolate. You can easily black frame insert from 60 hertz to 120 or to 180 or 240. Um, and that should be a fairly seamless experience. If you do wish to reduce the amount of flicker, so if you want to make 60 hertz input video rates less flickery, my recommendation would definitely be that CRT scan out emulation.
And that's what I was gonna talk about next, and just a quick tip to anybody who's using this, it doesn't crash Vint when you select it. If you're playing a video, it'll shut down the player, and you have to just restart the player.
Yeah.
Um, but for a situation like 24p sources with CRT emulation, um, I could never get that working right on, the RetroTink 4K unless I also strobed on and off. So each
Yeah.
of those slices, it would be the first slice, complete black frame, second slice, complete black frame, and it didn't really
Hmm.
it didn't have the effect that I had hoped. But if I had just had it running, so, for 24 to 144, just 6 times, it absolutely, fixed a lot of that 24p flashing at the cost of painful strobing that you can't watch for more than 10 seconds anyway. So are
Yeah.
there any tricks using Vint? Because, I see you got the slider. For me, since I got, a 240 hertz display here, I could,
Mhm.
pull the slider all the way up to 10 because that's 10 times the 24 hertz. Is there any way to kinda dial that in to reduce the flicker?
Yeah. I mean, so at least in theory, the more subframes that you create, the faster the flicker rate and the less perceptible flicker you're going to get from the end result. In practice, though, obviously that means the result is dimmer, which is also to your benefit as in reducing flicker. Um, but that isn't always necessarily the best experience.
Mhm.
Again, like with especially 24 FPS video, there's only so much you can do.
Mm.
If you can't get a good result with any of these strobing techniques with 24 FPS video, um, and that may very well be the case. If you do get a great result, then by all means, go ham and have a good time. But if you can't, my recommendation would really be that interpolation. So, um,
And,
yeah,
since I have this in front of me, what again would you suggest for my holy grail scenario of you have the, older heavy film grain footage, lots of OLED flashing,
yeah.
which settings, for something like that?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I want to also take this moment to bring up the great work that ratings.com has done. They've written very recently about revamping their motion testing
Mm,
for especially TVs, but displays in general, and they bring up the artifacts that result from playing low frame rate video on these displays. And the interesting result is that they create these different sliders, these different uh, spectrums of good to bad for these different components of motion fidelity.
mhm.
And with an LCD with slow pixel response times, obviously it's going to suffer in motion clarity in terms of the smearing effects and stuff like that. But when an OLED with essentially instantaneous pixel response times is not going to suffer from that at all. But the problem is that results in what they refer to as, I believe, refresh rate stutter, low refresh rate stutter. And essentially that just means that instead of the frames sort of blending into one another and smoothly transitioning, they change instantaneously. And obviously that means a clearer result, and you can more clearly see the issues with the source frames. And that results in a lower score, right? And the only ways around that are either to reduce the fidelity of the image or to do some sort of compensation. So what would I recommend for like an OLED, for example? Yeah, I personally try to target 120 FPS as my output frame rate just across the board.
Okay.
It gives me a nice smooth option for any source video. 24 FPS, 30 FPS, 60 FPS, all gets fed in, gets multiplied, and gets spit out at 120 FPS. And I very much enjoy the result. That is my preferred way to watch. And I am very fortunate to have a beautiful OLED TV that nails the viewing angles, the color, the brightness, everything. It's fantastic. And I no longer have to worry about the low frame rate stutter that it would otherwise produce. The downside, of course, is that you do need a powerful computer in order to achieve that. So if you have a weaker computer, then you might want to target 60 FPS, for example, instead of 120. Or if you have a variable refresh rate display, you can target somewhere in between, and you gotta dial that in. Right now, I give you all these sliders, these controls to set it how you want. Change the resolution, change the frame rate target, change the multiplier option, and then you basically try to set it as high as possible, presumably because you want the highest fidelity, before you start dropping frames, right? Because if you exceed the capabilities of your hardware, it will start to drop frames. And that's also one note that I want to make for strobing. So obviously with strobing, there is inherent flicker as a result. But and I definitely intend to do some more work here to optimize performance on this. But if you do try to target a really high resolution and a high flicker rate, you might exceed some of the bandwidth limitations. And because I have to create multiple images and move them around, and like I got to do some stuff there under the hood, it can't sometimes keep up with 4K resolutions, trying to triple strobe and all of that under all circumstances. With a 60 FPS video like that, that might not be capable on more limited hardware. So be aware that if you are getting some sort of frame pacing issues or more flicker than you might be expecting, that you open up the MPV video player stats, and you can do that by pressing I on the keyboard while the video is playing, and it will show you the drop frames from the decoder as well as the output. And the output drop frames will be indicative of the performance of Vint. So if you're dropping frames there, you're not getting a good experience. Yeah, and you're going to need some headroom too. So you're going to want to set the settings a bit lower than what your computer is capable of, just so you get a consistent experience under all circumstances. And here's a great example. So one of the beauties of the Vint interpolation, this Rife convolutional neural network depth-aware interpolation system, is that it's incredibly flexible. It'll work with any resolution. It does require a brief training for every new resolution and model version that you use. So I give you a selection of different model versions that have different performance characteristics and different visual outputs.
And is there a way is there in your notes when you look at these models, is there documentation on what they do?
So, I mean, this is an open source project, and you can take a look at what these different versions are and what people prefer. There's forum posts and people talk about how, oh, I use this version, it runs a little bit better, but I get these artifacts. Oh, this one handles this artifact well. So that's what I would recommend to understand which model works best for you. They're all relatively similar by and large. Like one isn't going to perform twice as well as the another. Like they're all going to be relatively similar. Yeah, so you can stick with the default. You can go with the newest one. There's really no way to go too wrong. But if you do want to fine tune it, you can try them out. You can get a sense of what works best for you. I don't restrict it at all. You can add your own models in there. You drop it in the folder, and it will show up in the drop-down list, and you can select it. Yeah, I don't limit it at all. So like I said, though, every new resolution and model combo will require a brief training step. So it'll basically do a pre-compilation there so that it can accelerate the interpolation as best it can. And that pre-training will only happen on the NVIDIA TensorRT and TensorRT RTX, which that's not confusing at all, right?
Yeah.
Because RT, okay. They are different. I do recommend the TensorRT regular acceleration most of the time. It tends to perform a little bit better. There are some trade-offs. You can look at all that. But yeah, if you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, for example, like I said, I also support Intel and AMD, or you can just use the CPU acceleration. But again, keep in mind that CPU acceleration is going to be very slow in comparison. Yeah, so sorry, with the interpolation rates, because Rife is so flexible, not only can you take any source video and double or triple the frame rate, you can also do like a fractional multiplier. So you can take a 24 FPS video and you can interpolate it perfectly to 60 FPS with no frame pacing judder whatsoever. Perfect frame pacing in the output. And how that works is it will discard some of the frames and it will interpolate at different places in between those frames. So the end result should be seamless. And that's how you can interpolate from 24 FPS to 30 FPS. So if you're watching a movie and it's super choppy, but you don't want like smooth video, you want that cinematic effect. If that is the experience that you want, the interpolation gives you the power to configure it that way. So you can take the edge off, in a sense. You can make it a little bit better, but not make it smooth. You can still get the cinematic frame pacing just a little bit smoother. And that's kind of analogous to what's called true cut motion. This is a brand. This is a technique that especially James Cameron has used for, like I said, Avatar 2, which is attempting to do a very similar thing. But instead of just simply interpolating and changing the output frame rate, it has an output frame rate of, in the case of Avatar 2, 48 FPS. And instead of changing that frame rate on a scene-by-scene basis or anything like that, what they do is they replace the second frame with an interpolated frame somewhere in between. So if you interpolate it at 0, that means that it's going to show 2 of the same frames one after another. It's basically going to be a 24 FPS video in a 48 FPS container. And then for other scenes, it's going to do an interpolation at 1, where it's basically going to be 48 FPS. And you get a smoother video, of course. But you can do it anywhere in between. So if you do a 0.5 interpolation there, then you basically get artificial judder, inconsistent frame pacing on purpose, which makes it smoother than a raw 24 FPS video, but not as smooth as 48 FPS. It's very weird. And it's a little janky because obviously if you're running a projector in a movie theater, you can't really change the frame rate on the fly.
Right.
And you also can't like do 36 FPS without like reconfiguring everything. Whereas with Vint, there is no frame pacing judder or anything like that. It's perfect pacing all over the place. You can even interpolate from 24 FPS down to like 24 FPS if you wanted to, and it will get perfect frame pacing. So if you want frame rate conversions, this is a great way to do it. And another beauty is obviously in the NTSC world, we have 24 and 30 FPS. But there's a lot of content that was mastered in 25 FPS. And sure, you can play back 24 FPS perfectly on a 120 hertz display without judder, I mean. Perfect frame pacing. Whether the result is good is obviously down to the 24 FPS and all that. But with 25 FPS, you can't do that. You need either variable refresh rate or some mitigation in place to improve that result. So what Vint enables is doing something like basically a 24/5 multiplier, for example. That's one that I use for 25 FPS video, which turns a 25 FPS video into a perfect 120 FPS video. And it doesn't come for free. So the way that the interpolation works in terms of performance impact, interpolating from a 24 FPS video to 30 FPS will be as expensive as interpolating from 24 FPS to 48 FPS. It's going to be the same performance impact, but it does give you control over the output, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you mind if I just... Good?
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was also just going to add, I'm so glad you brought up the RetroTink. Great piece of hardware. Mark Rejan of Blurbus has been quite involved with that project, and it's exceptionally low latency, so it's great for retro gaming. And there's a ton of great features packed into that. It is expensive. It does use an FPGA, so it can be reprogrammed at a hardware level. It's very cool tech, but you cannot make those cheap. It cannot be scaled down. It cannot be turned into a $30 consumer product. It would need to be turned into an ASIC, a fixed function piece of hardware, in order to bring that cost down.
Which means you'd have to make about 100,000 of them in order to actually get it even made. So it's something we've talked about a lot in the scene.
So FPGAs, like I said, they're a lot more flexible than that fixed focus hardware. You can update it, you can change it, but it's still limited. Not only can it not do everything,
right,
but you also have hard performance limitations. You're left with the spec of that hardware indefinitely. You have to replace it in order to improve that performance. So what that means is that if you have a 4K video, you can't do black frame insertion on the RetroTink.
Right.
As I understand. I haven't used the RetroTink, but I do understand the capabilities and the underlying technology there. So again, I don't mean to denigrate that at all. It's limited in what source video can take.
No one would interpret it that way, by the way. Everybody who follows this, follows the tech side of things, completely understood what you meant. And anybody who doesn't knows that you're not going to come on here and just throw shade. So yeah, no problem.
Absolutely. So it's a great piece of hardware. It does what it does, great. But you cannot ask it to do more than what it's made for. It has those hard limitations. There are things that it's not suited towards. And again, software will always be more flexible than hardware. Like you were asking if something was possible with Vint. And because Vint is a software solution, all things are possible. The only limitations are the performance and the amount of development time and resources devoted to things. But yeah, so with that RetroTink, it also doesn't have interpolation functionality, as I understand. It's simply video processing. You get CRT filters, you get strobing, you get all these sorts of great capabilities. And again, it's very low latency, and that's fantastic. But it doesn't provide some of the flexibility, the arbitrary high resolution. So Vint does not set any limitations. You can interpolate 8K video without a problem, limited only by the performance of your hardware. And new hardware, better performance. No restrictions on any of that. So there's also some other solutions out there. So obviously we all know about TV interpolation. That's one solution. There's display strobing, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute here as well.
Definitely.
You have boxes like the RetroTink that do strobing in the middle. you have some very capable hardware, like I'm sure many in the audience will know about Mad VR.
Hmm.
They're a group that makes some software that is great for video processing, and they also make hardware. So essentially, they make a small PC box with a video input, capture card, and a graphics card, and they do all of their video processing on that box. And they're not cheap. So they're very capable. They have all sorts of nice features. And frankly, if you walk into a billionaire's home, this is probably what they have hooked up to their TV. Their 7-figure micro LED TV that's 200 inches diagonal. So they're going to have this box there. And it also includes interpolation. They brand it as Motion AI, which, as I understand, is very similar to the interpolation that Vint uses. But whereas Vint is available for $20 on Steam and on itch.io, you can buy it, and it's entirely DRM free, so you can put it on a flash drive and run it wherever. No limitations, doesn't require online support, anything. Runs on any hardware that is compatible. But this Mad VR box, again, I don't mean to denigrate it. Like, it has its place. It's
I
a very
think
cool
the
piece of
point you're
tech.
trying to
But
make is if you buy Vint for a very cheap amount of
yeah,
money, you could do very close to what a $16,000 box might
yes,
be able to do.
or better,
So,
better,
yeah.
because the $16,000 box only has an RTX 5080.
Mm.
So you could easily have a 5090 PC and vastly exceed the capabilities of this machine. It's essentially two 5080s in one chip from a silicon standpoint.
Right. And I actually hope everybody does go and it's just madvrnv.com. I hope people do go check that out and then go check out Vint and kind of see for yourself.
Yeah.
So as
Yeah.
we're winding down the Vint talk, there are just two
Sure.
other things, just one very easy question and then one that might be a stupid question that I'm okay with. So just to make sure, just to stupid proof this, if somebody wants to take a 1080p Blu-ray and play it on their PC or connect it to their OLED or something like that,
Sure.
the settings that you would recommend just starting out. So let's just say it's at least a 120 hertz OLED.
Yeah.
You would want to select interpolation, multiply base frame rate, multiplier 5, which 5 times the original FPS.
Hmm.
And then max vertical resolution would be the vertical resolution. I know I skipped one, by the way, but
Yeah.
would be the vertical resolution of the video or the vertical resolution of the OLED? Because if it's a 1080p video,
Yeah.
2160p OLED, what would that be?
Absolutely. So I want to make it very clear that these settings are entirely independent, or not entirely. So they're largely independent of the source video, and they're entirely independent of the output display.
Okay.
So you want to configure them so they're aligned, yes, but you can set them however you please, and there's no limitations there. I'd say that I would probably recommend the target frame rate of 120 FPS rather than simply 5x multiplier, because if you decide to watch a 30 FPS video next, a 5x multiplier is going to turn that into, what is that, 150 FPS, which will be beyond the capabilities of a 120 hertz display.
Okay, so I think that's where I'm getting confused here, because on the
Yeah.
top you have real-time config, which is the settings that I've been calling out.
Sure.
But below that, offline config is where you have the target FPS and stuff like that.
Sorry. There's a circle selection box. So in the real-time config, you have the disable, interpolate, black frame insertion, and CRT emulation. But below that, you have target FPS value, and you have multiply base frame rate.
Okay, so that's where you suggest in the target FPS value to select, 120 if it's a 120 hertz OLED type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation, obviously depending on the performance of your hardware. So if you have a less performant GPU, you might want to turn that target down. And if you have a variable refresh rate display, you might want to target 2x multiplier.
And
like
simply by playing the video in full screening and tapping the I key on your keyboard will tell you if you have dropped frames or not. And that's really all you need to know for this, right?
Exactly. That should give you a good result. You can turn down the max vertical resolution, and how that works is essentially it will basically take the source video, and if it's above this max vertical resolution, it will scale it down using Elantro's scaling
Oh,
which is
great.
very high quality.
Okay.
It looks great, and again, it does not compress it. It simply scales down the resolution before it's processed, and then
Right.
it does another scaling that you configure in MPV to put that out onto the display. But if the resolution is below the max vertical resolution, it will leave the source video as is.
Great. It's good to
Yeah,
know. Okay.
untouched.
All
Yeah, so
right.
it's not going to
So,
scale up to this. It'll simply scale
and
down to it.
right. And which was the Rife model that you've been using for
Yeah.
your 120 hertz output?
So I've been using the 4.9 model,
Okay.
which is a little bit older, but I found it to be very consistent and provide a good experience. There are a lot of newer models. So there's the 4.26, and there's also heavy and light variants, V2 variants. The V2 variants, at least ostensibly, should be a little bit higher quality under some circumstances. The light models should obviously run a little bit faster. The heavy models a little bit slower but higher quality. Yeah, 4.26, I believe, is the newest version.
4.26 heavy V2, I think, is the highest one you have here.
Yeah.
And there should there be a noticeable difference in playback when going between 4.9 and 4.26?
There are going to be some performance differences and obviously quality differences as well. They shouldn't be enormous, so you shouldn't be too worried about selecting the wrong version.
Right, so it's not like on the built-in TV's interpolation. If you hit the wrong setting, it's like, whoa, okay, no, we're gonna back that off. So,
yeah, no, these are small tweaks that and newer versions are generally improved over older versions. But if you have a problem, then by all means, go try out different versions and see what works for you. Look at forums, see what settings work for you. Yeah.
okay, so that makes sense. So for somebody who wants to try this out, assuming I have a 36 or a 5060 graphics card now, and I'm
Yeah.
getting 0 frame drops while recording this and talking to you at the same time with Interpolate, target FPS at 120, Rife model 426 heavy 2, max vertical resolution 2160. So that's what I'll be playing with later. And the
Okay.
offline config, what do people need to set that out to mess with this as well?
I'm actually impressed you're getting that level of performance. I thought you might have to turn down a little bit, but I guess the 5060 is very capable. But sorry, can you please repeat the question that you?
Yeah, so the offline config,
Offline config,
the
yes.
box below that.
Absolutely. So the real-time config obviously controls what settings are used for playback in MPV. So again, this is all about real-time. You can take any local video file that you have on your computer. You can have any online video file or video source that is supported by YT DLP, open source library. There's actually a list of all the different sources that they support. Obviously, the notable one is YouTube, but you can just copy a link in there and play it seamlessly. You even get like a little loading bar inside of MPV. It's all seamless, and it does all the processing and everything just works. And then finally, you can also take real-time video sources from any UVC source, USB video class, and that means a webcam. That means a capture card. I will also note, so Vint is very targeted at video. Vint is actually kind of a portmanteau of video and interpolation. So this is not intended for video games.
Right, yeah.
I want to make that very clear. The main reason for that is simply because the latency will not be super low, right? This is intended to provide a video viewing experience where latency is not the key concern.
Right.
And I don't really have an easy way to improve the latency in the way that I would want to for a video gaming type solution without entirely changing the pipeline and all of the underlying systems that I use. So for video, this should be a good result. But like I said, with USB video class, you can take a capture card, you can take a console, you can plug it in, and it will work, but the latency will be high. So I do not really recommend that, but it will work. This will work with any video source that you can feed into the pipeline. Yeah, there's no restrictions. DRM video sources will be a problem, of course. So, for example, Netflix.
Right.
isn't really going to work with it, unfortunately, and that's just down to Netflix. Unless you break the DRM there, that's the way the cookie
Right.
crumbles. Yeah, so that's basically the real-time side. The offline config, that applies to the transcoding. So a key feature of Vint is that you can basically take any sort of video file that you have locally and feed it into this interpolation pipeline and then spit out a new video file. And that means that you do not need as powerful of a computer. You can do the CPU processing. You can run on an RTX 2060. And even if you can't run 4K video at 120 FPS in real time, you can do it in this offline transcoding. If you want to do a video editing thing, if you want to convert a 24 FPS video into a 30 FPS video, or you have a 30 FPS webcam recording and you want to interpolate it up to 60 FPS for some YouTube video, like this is all within the capabilities of Vint. And then I have some obviously sliders in there.
I actually didn't know that at all. I'm really glad I asked the question then. So offline config, you basically ignore if you're playing a video file through it, but if you want to use it to transcode, that's the settings. That's really cool. That is really cool. So there's also, you nicely put these little arrows here. So if you're not going to do the offline at all, you could just kind of minimize it and you don't even have to have it up on screen. That's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with that offline transcoding, so there's a real-time queue of videos. You can place local and online videos all in there, and it'll even grab like the title of a YouTube video and just put it in there, the length of it, when it was uploaded, who uploaded it, like all this information is up there. You can even download that video right there if you scale over the right next to the remove, copy, and play. There's a download button, so you can download those YouTube videos just inside of this. But then once you play the queue, it'll spit all of those into MPV, and it'll just play those one after another. Or you can play an individual video, or you can move them around. You can drag and reorder. I'll give you quite a bit of control there. And then there's the offline queue, where you can add local video files, and you basically set a continuous rate factor. And that continuous rate factor essentially dictates the target video fidelity of the output video file. Obviously, if the video source is low quality, you're not going to benefit from higher fidelity continuous rate factor as much as if the source video is super high fidelity, super clear, super high resolution bit rate. The resolution doesn't play into it. It's just the bit rate for that particular resolution and the encoding quality. So the way that continuous rate factors work is essentially the higher that factor, the lower the video file quality, which is a little counterintuitive. So the lower continuous rate factor, basically the higher quality output. It's essentially, think of it analogous in some ways to like a compression ratio, although that isn't really what it is. I tend to target like 14 is a pretty good value if you want like a pretty high quality output. You can get up to like 30 and still have an acceptable result with higher resolution videos, especially. And then I have some encoding library options. So you can either do CPU or GPU encoding for H.264 or HEVC, H.265. And what's great...
That's a lot. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'd like to add some more options in there. So this is all based off of FFmpeg, which fantastic library. It's the same library that things like Handbrake use under the hood. It's that is what YouTube uses on their servers to transcode videos. Very powerful library. I love it. But yeah, so you can choose the encoding library and the quality that you're targeting, and you can transcode an individual file, or you can just create a list of different files in there. You can add an output name, whatever you want, and you can click transcode Q, and it will just go through all of that and create those outputs for you. And what I wanted to get at here is just that because the interpolation, obviously, is ideally done on the GPU, because the quality between the CPU and the GPU will be identical. It's the same process. It will not change, regardless of the acceleration. The only thing that will change is dramatically the performance. So what you can do is you can do the interpolation on the GPU, and then you can do the encoding on the CPU. So the encoding will radically change in quality between the CPU and the GPU. Radically. CPU encoding is far slower, but far higher quality. You're going to get way, way more quality out of the same bit rate with CPU.
Yeah, I
encoding.
messed with this for, I mean, it's 6 or 7 years ago now, but a friend of mine, John Linneman from Digital Foundry, talked to me about how he exports his videos basically uncompressed. So it's like a 200, 300 gigabyte file, but then CPU compresses after. So you end up with a smaller file size that's with a much better quality. And that's what ends up being uploaded to YouTube, which kind of makes everything easier. And I still use that in most cases for my videos to end up with better quality at a smaller file size at the cost of 20 minutes. Really, it's the only extra bit it takes me. So and 20 minutes to walk away, not like having to actually do stuff. So
but
that's cool.
The beauty here is that you're not competing for resources. So you have the interpolation on the GPU and you have the encoding on the CPU, and they both run at the same time. And the interpolation is actually so fast relative to the CPU encoding that the CPU encoding is the bottleneck. That is what limits the speed generally. Obviously, if you throw like an AMD EPYC CPU at it and a weaker GPU, then it probably won't be the same way. But so that's that functionality. I obviously am continually working on this. I released it nearly a year ago now, and I've added quite a few new features, all the different acceleration libraries, expanded a lot of the UI elements, the CRT emulation. I'm constantly listening to feedback from the community. I actually have a poll on Blurbusters forums. So if you want to put in some feedback about what you'd like to see me focus on for future development, please go there. And there's a few things that I wanted to highlight here. So Vint, this is very much a passion project for me. Like I said, I created it because this is software that I want. There aren't a whole lot of options out there. There are some software interpolation options out there. On the gaming front, obviously you have AMD and NVIDIA and Intel pushing frame generation in games. DLSS-FG is a big push. But those generally tend to rely pretty heavily on motion vectors in the games themselves, requiring integration with the game. So if the game doesn't support it out of the box, the developer doesn't put in the work, you don't get to use it. Also, it means that it doesn't work for video because video doesn't have those motion vectors built into it. It's simply the images themselves. And it also has a lot of visual artifacts. So the general recommendation for this frame generation is that you need to have a high base frame rate to begin with, or else you're just going to get a bad result. And people are recommending you start above the flicker fusion threshold. So you want to have 90 FPS to start with, and then you do frame gen on top, which sounds a little ridiculous, right? If you're getting 90 FPS, then who cares, right? Why would you want to go even higher than that? I mean, obviously, yeah, I think anybody in the Blurbusters community would have a few reasons, but I think the real use case for that frame gen is that you have these 240 hertz monitors, you have these 480 hertz monitors, you have kilohertz monitors being launched, and it's not ending there. And that frame generation above the flicker fusion threshold has far fewer artifacts because there's far less change between frames, there's far less that the interpolation can do wrong, and you still get the motion benefits, you still get the clarity, you still get the smoothness, all of that from that frame generation. And there's a great tool out there on Steam, and I don't know the folk behind it, but I do know the product, and I highly recommend it because of its flexibility and all of that. It's been covered quite heavily. Lossless scaling. It's a $7 tool on Steam, and that works great with video games. It's using a very similar optical flow interpolation to this frame generation, but it works on any game that you throw at it. And it will also work on videos too. It runs very fast, relatively speaking, so you can run it at the same time as a game. But the downside is that, again, if you start running it from source video that is below the flicker fusion threshold, you're going to have a rough time. There will be artifacts. It won't be smooth. There's going to be warping and all sorts of weird things. It doesn't handle 24 FPS video in a way that I could recommend. Right. But it is great for games. It's
So
great
that is
for
actually going
yeah.
to be a great segue into the next thing I want to ask, but I do just want to go back before I forget on two things that might be stupid. So if they are, don't hold back and let's not spend too much time. But
No
one
worries.
of the experiments that I did was taking a Raspberry Pi and Kodi and
Yeah.
taking a 24p source and outputting it as 72 hertz. I have a bunch of video files I made that allow me to count frames, and it was absolutely working perfectly. It was each frame was just simply being played 3 times,
Sure.
and so confirmed that's working. And then I put that through the RetroTink 4K in order to output 144 hertz. And adding BFI in that scenario, you're essentially just one on, one off so you're 72 hertz strobing. And I
That'd be
actually
triple
thought,
strobing, yeah.
yeah, I thought it worked great. There was none of the weird issues. Um, and then same thing with CRT beam simulation for that. Obviously, it's only 50% of the screen, but both of those worked well.
Mhm.
So is there a point to that at all? And if so, can you actually do that in Vint where you just say play 3 times, interpolate as a 72 hertz signal? Because if you do that in the RetroTink 4K, even though you're playing 3 frames in a row, then 3 frames off in a row, I still, for whatever reason, get 24 hertz strobing when I play it like that.
Oh, okay, I think I understand. So that's
So 3 on, 3 off for 144 hertz in that scenario.
but the
Um,
3 frames, those are all the same frame, right?
correct.
At least in theory, the end result of showing the same frame for 3 cycles and then having a black frame for 3 cycles will be a 50-50 ratio, a 50% duty cycle, which will be literally identical from a physics standpoint to a 24 FPS regular black frame insertion with a 50% duty cycle. Like that will be
Really?
identical. Yeah.
So
It's good.
So in Vint
Yeah.
to emulate this, then I would want to do black frame insertion, and that is that just if I'm running at 144 hertz, is that just simply the same as hitting triple strobing?
So it would not be the same with triple strobing because triple strobing would be real frame, black frame,
Mhm.
real frame, black frame.
That's what I thought.
Yes. In this case, I would recommend variable refresh rate. So ideally, a competent display, if you do regular black frame insertion on a 24 FPS video, it'll spit out 48 FPS. You send that to the display, and it will simply show that 48 FPS natively, and you will get the same effective result.
All right.
Yeah.
On my display, it was displays. It was incredibly flickery when I did that,
Okay.
whereas opposed to the Raspberry Pi into the Tink, it wasn't.
So it sounds
But
like your
I
display is not handling the variable refresh rate adequately. I don't know of a good way to really do that. There are ways to like force low frame rate compensation and things like
yeah.
that, but there isn't a way natively in Vint to handle that particular.
But I also don't know if there's a point
Yeah.
because when I was using my test footage, doing it that way, so 72 to 144 with both styles of BFI didn't really fix anything, and it certainly wasn't any better or worse than just triple strobing that's already built into it. So I
Okay.
asked that because even if it's theoretically possible, my gut's telling me it's useless. It's not going to achieve anything.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly a matter of personal preference, right? It's what it boils down
Like, worth trying if anybody wants to mess with it. And the really stupid question is there a way to blend CRT beam emulation and interpolation so that you could interpolate the different 24p slices so that you don't get the strobing effect?
Yeah, I think so. So not currently. I have definitely
Okay.
gotten the request to do interpolation up to one level and then do black frame insertion or CRT emulation beyond that. And that is certainly possible. Again, it's all software, everything is possible, but I can actually do that relatively easily. So I do need to focus and create that.
Well, once
Yeah.
again, just like I said, is it pointless, or would you actually get the benefits of CRT beam emulation without the 24 hertz strobing?
You definitely would. So as
Oh,
long as
okay.
the source frame rate and the output frame rate are all
Or
within
an
the range
integer.
and everything,
Mhm.
then you would absolutely get the benefit. It would simply lower the persistence of the image and improve the motion fidelity. Yeah.
Awesome. So I am very much looking forward to testing that out then, because that might be That might just be what I've been aiming for this whole time, and I just didn't even know it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
okay. Well, now, so to bounce back around, you started talking about frame gen stuff, and
Sorry,
while this isn't,
do you mind if
yeah, sorry,
I just hold you for a minute? Is
yeah,
there a
of
way to
course,
pause the interview for just a moment here?
absolutely. Let me just hit the pause button.
Thanks.
All right, we're back.
Yeah.
So, I think this is when you started talking about frame gen before. This is the perfect time, I think, to rely on your background and your knowledge. Which, although this doesn't have anything to do with Vint, it all comes from all of your experience in this.
Yeah,
So, frame gen is something that if anybody, that's a completely different thing that we could probably spend a long time on. So, I would
without
go
a
to
doubt.
Blurbusters and check that stuff out now. But
Yeah.
all of this Pulsar stuff had just been released. There was the post up on Blurbusters. There was that great video from Battle Nonsense, which I'll also link in the description for anybody that hasn't seen that yet. And there was one thing there. So I guess two things about it. First is it essentially seems to work very similar to CRT beam emulation, but on the monitor level. Is that I know I'm oversimplifying, but is that a general concept that's correct, or am I way off from that?
Yeah, no, there's definitely an element to that for sure. And I mean, obviously, NVIDIA has a long history of having some very capable engineers creating some fantastic technical solutions out there. And this appears to be yet another one. Mark Rajan has been talking about how fantastic the Pulsar display experience is. Um, yeah, so fundamentally, the way that I understand that it works, from the testing and reporting that I've seen, I haven't gotten a chance to use one yet, unfortunately, but essentially they're taking a standard reference design. In this case, it's going to be a 360 hertz, 27-inch, 1440p IPS type display. And it's not especially bright. It's something like 400 nits, and actually there are OLEDs that are considerably brighter in SDR than this. Um, Yeah, and obviously it comes with all the downsides of an LCD, right? And this doesn't even have full array local dimming, so you're not going to have the kind of like HDR kind of thing going on. I don't believe it even like focuses on that HDR capability. So keep these expectations in check. It also starts, I believe, at $600, which in an age where you can get OLEDs 1440p 240 hertz on sale for about 300, and you can get 480 hertz ones for around the same price as this. That's a tough sell, but it does offer some fantastic capabilities. So the fundamental uh, Pulsar capability is combining variable refresh rate with strobing, where traditionally they have been separate systems. So that's a great capability in and of itself. It's not the first implementation of such capabilities.
Mhm.
There are other solutions out there that have all been of mixed quality. They've had issues of their own. It's a tough problem to solve, but clearly NVIDIA has put a lot of work into this, and they've created a solution that will do that. I think better than anything else we have out there. And the end result of this is that you get the lower latency, and you don't have to worry about VSync. You don't get any of the downsides of that fixed frame rate, fixed refresh rate configuration. You can really max out your hardware more under this circumstance, while simultaneously getting the lower persistence of that strobing. And
Mm.
it sidesteps a lot of the flicker issues, um, perceptible flicker because of uh, just the length, the average length of the image being shown, the backlight being pulsed and all. And it also, again, like you say, does a rolling strobe rather than a global strobe, which is great. Not only does it line up with the scan out process of the LCD so that it avoids a lot of the pixel transition, but it also means that the flicker should be far less intense than a global flicker.
And the flicker is what I was most confused about because the pulsar, I thought I had gotten the concept right, except Mark just wrote that post about how good news, pulsar is getting 60 hertz support. but originally it didn't go less than 75 hertz, even though 90 hertz strobing is usually what the minimum would be. But if
Yeah.
you're taking something and you're multiplying it, uh, but wouldn't in this case it take a 60 hertz source and multiply it to whatever the native frame rate was, the same way everything else does? So right now, if you have a 120 hertz OLED and you put unless it's in boost mode, if you
Mhm.
have this, standard mode, it'll take every 60 hertz frame and just play it twice. So by doing that, wouldn't you actually be able to get um, more more of the pulsing just like you would with the CRT beam emulation? Or why would there be a chance of more flicker with that? And if so,
Yeah.
could you just double it to 120 hertz in order to, on the source end of things in order to fix that?
Yeah. Um, that's a tough issue. So, yeah, everyone should check out the post that Mark did on the Blurbuster site there, and he talks about how he has been working with NVIDIA to lower that base flicker rate all the way down even to 48 FPS.
Mm.
So even more flexible than that. Below that, you're really going to get some awful flickering, but there's just no way around it other than interpolation or something. So why would you not just want to double it? That's the question, and that's fair. I mean, obviously you can just double it, but the problem is the flicker rate will be double. It'll be less noticeably flickery, but you're also going to get multiple image artifacts. Essentially, you're going to get image
Mm.
separation in
Okay.
motion. And if it's a movie and there's a lot of motion blur and everything baked into it, it's going to be far less grating than if you're playing a game and you see the enemy that you're looking at separate into multiple elements. Like it's harder to aim and all of that if you have multiple images there. So that's why you might not want to double your frame rate and
Because
strobe
this,
multiple times.
while I'm always interested in improving movies, especially 24p content, my
Yeah.
brain went immediately to, doesn't even matter if it's retro gaming or not. If you're, sure, if you're using a processor like the Tink 4K, you could double it. But if you're just PC gaming, you could just set your output to 120 hertz for a 60 hertz game,
Mm-hmm.
a 60 frame per second game. And that would be an easy way to go about it. But yeah, then that would absolutely kill the whole point of doing this thing.
Yeah. So like you wouldn't get the blur, which would be one benefit, but it separates the blur into separate distinct images. It's an interesting result to be sure, but I think NVIDIA certainly has the right idea by recommending you start at a higher base frame rate, because again, even if you do have this rolling flicker, it's still flickering at a low rate at 60 hertz, and even worse, lower rates. So um, again, you can't just easily multiply. You want that higher base frame rate, and that I think really is where Pulsar shines. Is if you're targeting between like 140 and 200 FPS, well within the VRR range, you're
Mhm.
going to get some very good motion clarity because the motion persistence is quite low. They're advertising, I believe, a 4-to-1 ratio, or 3-to-1, I guess, but like a 25% duty cycle. Basically, it's on for 1/4 of the time. And that would take 200 FPS and give you the motion persistence of 1/800th of a frame, right? Like it'd be
Hmm.
a little over 1.1 milliseconds persistence in that case, which is quite good. Obviously, because it's an LCD, pixel response times are a massive issue. And IPS panel types are particularly slow. Whereas TN monitor types, which are typically what you get in these high performance gaming strobing displays, those can transition faster, not remotely as fast as an OLED, of course, but still faster, much faster than an IPS. So
Hmm.
the IPS will be a problem. There's just no way around that. The strobing will help a lot, but you still risk crosstalk. And what crosstalk is essentially a multiple image artifact as well, caused in this case by the pixel transitions taking longer than the refresh cycle. And typically that isn't necessarily a problem on a full persistence display, sample and hold. If one pixel, or sorry, one frame blends into the next. Obviously, it's blurrier, but it's not necessarily worse. You're not going to get special artifacts. There's no special line where things are good and then they're bad. Whereas
Right.
with strobing, there is a line. Once that pixel transition starts taking longer than a frame, then you get multiple image artifacts, and then yeah, that's a problem. So there's
Okay.
no way to avoid that. The spec may have been impressive a few years ago, 360 hertz, 1440p IPS, but in 2026, when we have again kilohertz monitors, we've got
Mhm.
OLEDs coming out our ears, RGB pixel matrices, quantum dot OLEDs with super large color volumes, tandem OLEDs with brightness that is incomprehensible. Like, yes, this will bring the motion clarity of especially like 120, 140, like between 120 and 200, the motion clarity will probably be best on this display as opposed to anything else available.
Mm.
But if you are able to push those high frames, if you are able to run frame generation or whatever have you, and get 500 FPS in your games, you're going to get not only similar or better motion clarity on these OLEDs, but you're also going to get the perfect pixel response times, which, yeah, have benefits outside of simply the motion clarity. You're going to get perfect viewing angles, perfect contrast, way better colors. These OLED displays are simply superior at reproducing what we
Yeah.
see.
When I first saw this announcement, the only thing I could think of at first was, why didn't they do this on an OLED? Because that could have just blown the doors off everybody if you could add this enhancement to existing technology. And then the next thing I thought of was,
Mhm.
well, is this the holy grail for anybody who has 60 hertz? When I say retro, it could even be the Switch 1 or all the Switch 2 games that are, 60 frames per second. Could this actually be the CRT beam emulation that Mark's been talking about in a monitor? And I guess
Yeah.
the answer to the second one is no. But I still don't understand why they wouldn't have shown this off on a high-end display just to blow people's minds with it. So,
No, that's a great point. And I mean, it may very well. I think it would probably be one of the best ways to consume 60 hertz content in terms of motion clarity and everything like that, if you can tolerate that 60 hertz flicker. And this will be more tolerable again than global flicker. But
all right, yeah. So that was going to be
yeah,
the last thing. Is do you, without seeing it in person, obviously,
yeah.
it's more of a speculation. But what kind of flicker are we talking about? Is it the same as one on, one off from 60 to 120? Is it worse than that? Is it better than that?
The rolling shutter, the rolling flicker should be an improvement over that. It's hard to quantify
I'd
just
still
how.
be very interested to see this in action. Then,
Oh yeah, it'll be an improvement. It's hard to say exactly how much of an improvement. As I understand, I think they have like 10 different zones. So it's basically a 10-to-1 ratio.
hmm.
1/10 of the display is lit at any given time. Um, but yeah, I mean, it should be better than global flicker, but it's still 60 hertz. And there's no way around that. How much that impacts you obviously depends on your circumstance, what content, all of these sorts of things. That's really a personal judgment. You can't really make that decision without viewing it and testing it.
And it
It's very
truly is a
qualitative.
personal judgment because I have one of my favorite things to do is to bring my friends over, especially the ones that are not nerds at all,
Yeah.
and just ask them like, "What do you think's better?" And it's funny, it, whenever I do something that is like a genuine improvement, almost everybody's like, "Oh yeah, that one's better." I'm not spending any more money on it though, because they're not nerds; they don't care that much.
Yeah.
But it's also fascinating to me to see the BFI stuff because I had friends walk in and they just walked in the bright room, turned around, and went, "Whoa, why is it flickering?"
Yeah.
And I had other friends watch half a movie with it on and half a movie with it off, and they're like, "I can't tell any difference whatsoever right now. Did you change something, or is you playing a joke on me and it's the same thing twice?" Like, so it truly is each person has to decide for themselves, which makes describing this a pain. But yeah,
I
I
mean,
wish
that's
mhm,
good.
go for it.
No, I was gonna say that's kind of the ethos behind Vint, right? Is it's up to
Try it
you.
yourself.
You get the
Yeah.
control. This is giving you options, not taking them away. But
Well,
yeah, I did want to just quickly touch on the
mhm,
OLED question, right? So
mm,
obviously, this Pulsar technology is built around not just LCD, but also this particular reference design. There are 4 monitors available from different manufacturers. 600, 650 or whatever, but they're all essentially identical. Like any differences are going to be slight changes in implementation or visual packaging or anything like that. But like the performance should be identical. But why wouldn't you do this on an OLED? I mean, that is a fair question. Why wouldn't you? Again, I don't know why. This is like a last hurrah for LCDs. It's been tough to justify LCDs, frankly, ever since 2019 when LG started launching their C series OLEDs with the HDMI 2.1, so you get 4K 120 hertz with variable refresh rate. And sure, the smallest size you get was like 48, 42 inches. But if you could stand that, then it was hard to justify any other display from just a pure performance perspective. Unless you really needed those higher frames, and I did. Yeah, and I can't wait for the 4K 240 hertz or faster TVs to come out. That'll be nice, but not this year apparently. But yes, no. Why wouldn't they do OLED? That is a very good question, and I can't really answer that. I mean, strobing has typically been reserved for LCDs. I mean, there was this weird period of time where OLEDs were lower refresh rate than LCDs, just as a general rule. Anytime we went up to 120 to 240 to 480, it was always the LCDs and then the OLEDs. And there isn't any technical reason behind that. It's not easier to make a faster refresh rate LCD. If anything, the pixel response times alone make that far less appealing and far less, like, it's kind of like, I think, how Rockstar releases GTA on the worst console and then the better console and then on PC. So if you want the best experience, you got to buy it 3 times. I think that's maybe what's going on here. It's complete speculation, but like maybe.
Yeah,
but NVIDIA doesn't care about that.
Try it out on display. That they probably are using a panel that is so plentiful that they can get so cheap that they could just say, all right, let's just do it, and then we'll go back and maybe there needed to be, very often with stuff like this, there's behind the scenes stuff that you don't get unless you're there. And it could just be that these IPSs could tolerate this kind of pulsing without any changes to the panel themselves. And any other panel might have needed the tiniest little change that doesn't really cost any more. Then you have to put it through the production line again and change everything. So even though it might not be costing the companies any money, anybody that's ever worked in contract manufacturing knows you're talking minimum 3 months, but really like a year before you could start on a scale that these companies make the panels at. So it could just be as simple as that. So
it could, absolutely. Although NVIDIA was talking about how this is like a 10-year project now. And
I saw that.
But this technology, I do want to highlight, like, obviously it's built around LCD and this LCD specifically. And like you say, you don't need to change the panel at all. It's all about the backlight. It's all about how you drive the display panel itself. So the overdrive of that panel is really a huge part of what makes Pulsar work. It's not just the strobing. It's not just integrating with variable refresh rate. It's also the overdrive and how they balance that and compensate for everything. But with OLED, so obviously you don't have a backlight. There is no backlight strobing. Everything is in the panel. It's all about how you drive that panel. And traditionally, the only strobing that we've had for OLEDs has been black frame insertion, which the distinction is kind of arbitrary, frankly. Like, one is just earlier in the process than the other, whereas strobing on the display itself, it doesn't really care about the video input. Black frame insertion, it's kind of more limited in that sense. You can't do a 1% duty cycle, for example, unless you have a 100-to-1 ratio or 100. So like, short of that, if you want to get 10 hertz, you need a kilohertz monitor. Like, but short of that, there's no real difference between display strobing and black frame insertion. But with OLEDs, I don't know of any display side strobing, which is a shame because it's not a limitation of the technology. While there is no backlight to strobe, and it's certainly more difficult because you have to drive these pixels, and that's a more demanding process on an OLED because, again, it's all emissive, it's all whatever. But there's literally no reason why you couldn't, on a line-by-line basis, simulate a CRT on an OLED from a technical standpoint. You could do that,
Yeah.
and you can do essentially what Pulsar is doing, right? This rolling strobe and the variable refresh rate and all of that on an OLED. And the only downside really would be the brightness. So that is one key fact. The Pulsar displays are not that bright normally, but they don't get dimmer when you strobe. They stay the same brightness.
So I could be wrong about this, but
Yeah.
I vaguely remember having a conversation a while back about doing exactly that, and the answer I got was it would either require a completely new ASIC to be built from scratch or some kind of processing power in the monitor that would
Yeah,
significantly raise the cost
it would. Yeah.
to the point where it wouldn't be feasible, and that's why we're not seeing it on OLEDs yet. But I'm pretty that was well-informed speculation. So, it wasn't just like two people having a beer talking about the things they like to see in the monitors. That was somebody in the industry who would have had a good guess. So it was just a guess, but a good guess that I think
Definitely.
it sort of makes sense.
No, that does make a ton of sense. And I just realized that I was actually wrong. There are OLED displays that don't use what would be described as black frame insertion, but rather use the exact same strobing that you'd find in one of these LCD displays. And
Oh, yeah?
those are actually very common. And they've been going back a decade. OLED VR headsets.
Oh, yeah.
They're
Wow.
doing essentially this. So we already know the technology is not the limiting factor.
Huh.
It's there. There's nothing stopping it. But yeah.
Well,
Good.
I unfortunately I gotta go in a couple of minutes, but
Yeah,
VR VR stuff. We should do a follow up in a little bit. When
I would love
the
to.
next any interesting stuff that comes out in Vint, I'll probably be covering on RetroRGB. The only reason I haven't written posts about it before is because I just didn't think I thought it would almost be disrespectful to drop a post without context. So now that I can tell people, hey, listen to this interview if you want all of the deep dives, I'll be covering it in the future. And we'll do a follow up with your VRR work as well. I would love to. But I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to do all this because while we did get very technical, there
Yeah.
are so many people who follow RetroRGB that are way smarter than me that have been wanting exactly this kind of conversation. And I also
Mhm.
want to say that there are people like me that, sometimes struggle to keep up with some of the more deeper stuff that still truly enjoy that you took the time to do this. And that might push them to learn a little bit more. It's basically everything. Every time I talk to Mark from Blurbusters, that's what happens. He
Oh
teaches me
yeah.
something new that makes me want to go learn more about it. And I come back with 1,000 more questions for him. So just thank you, William. I really do appreciate this. Obviously, I really am a fan of your software. Otherwise, I would have never bought it and asked you to be on. But yeah, this was cool. I learned so much about how our eyes are perceiving video.
Yeah.
And I think while we talked a lot about 24p, so much of what you described, everybody listening could just apply to video games. And that,
Mhm.
that's probably what I'm going to follow up with you on at some point in the future.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on. I very much enjoyed your channel and all the interesting things that you cover, the interesting people you talk to, and I'd be
Thank you.
very happy to talk with you in the future on VR. Yeah, do you, to the audience, I'd also point you towards, I mean, any of the Blurbusters articles, but specifically regarding frame gen, and I compare frame gen and strobing technologies in a couple of articles I've written recently, and we can link those as well. And please put any questions that you have about those things. Yeah, like I said, Vint is very much a passion project. I just wanted to highlight, like, I am not making any meaningful amount of money from this. So
Right.
if you are interested in what I'm doing here, if you do want me to put more development resources into this, I'd ask that you buy Vint, you recommend it to friends and stuff. The more people that support me in buying Vint, the more the resources I can devote to improving this and building onto this. Like, if I can make minimum wage with the amount of work that I do, then I'd be happy. And I have aspirations. So, like, this is a very open piece of software. I don't price it at $19.99. I price it at $20. I add no DRM whatsoever. I would very much like to make all of this source available, or even potentially open source in the future, if I can find a way to do that. yeah, if you want to try it out, unfortunately, I can't really make a demo because that would require some sort of DRM. So my
Right, yeah.
recommendation is Steam has a very generous refund policy. If it works for you, buy it and keep it and use it and enjoy it. If it doesn't, no harm, no foul. You can return it and there's no
Yeah,
impact to you.
as somebody that's bought it, almost right after it came out, I could say with confidence that if somebody's listening to this and they feel like tinkering with it, they're gonna buy it, probably play with it, and if it does what they want now, cool, and if not, they're probably gonna forget about it and then come back to it when I post an update on RetroRGB and go, "Oh, let me go try that new feature," and eventually they're gonna hit a feature that goes, "That's what I'm looking for my content on my TV," so
Yeah.
I don't think anybody here is gonna worry about that. Or it's not for them, but they still enjoyed listening to the interview. But in my opinion, both of those are awesome. So thank everybody for that. Cool.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, William, and you will definitely be hearing more from me soon.
Awesome. Well, this was so much fun to talk with you today, and yeah, I'm looking forward to talking in the future.